Welcome. Welcome to a Fortuna Admissions Masterclass. Applications to the world's top MBA programs are going to be up this year, way up. As an industry leader, Fortuna Admissions connects with many thousands of MBA candidates from all over the world, applying to the M7, to INSEAD and London Business School, to the S10. And what we're seeing indicates a very busy and therefore a very competitive year, whether it's MBB and the Big Four, IB and private equity. I think everybody that has held off on their business school plans is stepping back. And so if that's your plan, we're delighted that you can join us for the first of several sessions over the next 3 weeks. The dream team at Fortuna are going to bring the essentials of the applications from the top schools to really help you shine in this process. So we'll get started. I mentioned that dream team, whether it's Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, INSEAD, LBS, Columbia, Booth, MIT, Sloan, Kellogg. We've got you covered with former admissions directors, associate deans, associate directors from all of these top schools. And my colleagues won't say it, but I can say it about my colleagues. They're unbelievably generous with the advice, the guidance, the insight that they share with their clients and that they share in sessions like this. So we're delighted that you're joining us. And of course, for your specific profile, your personal story, we're available. We offer free consultations and we take them very seriously, looking through your resume so that we can really have an in-depth discussion about your plans, your next steps. We talked about tonight's session and we'll be focusing on the essays for Harvard, Stanford and Wharton. Now, it's true, we often talk about HSW, but I'm going to be provocative. Given that Stanford now enjoys a 96% yield into the program, I'm going to refer to it, at least for the next 12 months, as SHW. And so it's my pleasure to be joined by Silpa Sama. Silpa is one of our senior expert coaches and a former admissions reader at Stanford GSB. Many of you will be familiar with Carla Cohen. It's been wonderful to work with Carla in the last 7-8 years. She brings, again, all of that expertise as a former associate director at Harvard Business School. And my co-founder at Fortuna Admissions, Judith Silverman Hadara, who, of course, was the former head of MBA admissions at the Wharton School. So we've really got you covered in terms of expertise. And we could cover a lot in tonight's session, but as we said, it really is the essays. If we get the time, and you'll want to hang on to every word of my panelists, we'll try perhaps to talk about standing out beyond the essays, any strategies for round 1 versus round 2. Remember, round 3 really is not a strategy for the schools that we'll be discussing tonight. Some of the common mistakes, and of course, the timeline that we'll be looking for. And please share your questions. There are many hundreds of you that are joining us for this session. Perhaps others are now catching this on YouTube or one of the other Fortuna channels. But even then, send in your questions, and perhaps that could be the basis for the discussion that we'll have in the free consultation with you. Now, starting with the idea of SHW, we're going to start with Stanford. And I'm going to turn over to Silpa. We talk about iconic essays. I guess, what is it, the 20th anniversary of What Matters Most to You and Why? The question that all of the other schools are very jealous of. So Silpa, when it really boils down to it, what are we trying to capture in the essays to the GSB?
Sure, thank you, Matt. So the essays for the GSB, these require a fair amount of self-reflection. So prior to even starting the process for the essays, applicants should really think about what's shaped them, what inspires them, what drives them. Really just think about their values and their passions and their experiences and goals, and arrive at what they really want the admissions committee to know about them. I think it's really important to resist the urge to over-strategize or push a certain agenda to, tie a narrative into a neat little bow, and really just take the time to reflect and answer in an authentic way. So for one, answer each component of the question. It's, when we talk about the iconic, what matters most, it's important not only to cover that, but also the reasons why. Should share the experiences that led you to realize what matters most to you. And really, to make sure that you answer the question posed, might not be a bad idea to share your essay with like a close friend or a family member and see what question they think you answered when you hand them the essay without the prompt. What is the essay about? What matters most itself it's a great question because it offers a unique opportunity to convey who you really are rather than focusing on simply what you've accomplished, right? It allows you to touch on the things that shed light on what shaped you, or the experiences that have inspired the way you go through life. What is your true north? What's really important is to just be personal and authentic with this. You might tell a story that demonstrates your persistence or your work ethic or creativity, or you might even tell a story about a mistake you made or how you coped with that and what you learned from it. There's really no wrong answer to this, and vulnerability isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just aim to show the dimensions that AdCom might not necessarily see in other areas of your application, like your character or your identity or your beliefs, your passions. Just provide a view of how your background may have, shaped your direction and your journey thus far, and how it influences, the impact you'll make within the program and in your broader communities, really.
Right. Now, Silpa, you were fortunate to work alongside Kirsten Moss, the Associate Dean of Admissions, Will Torres. I mean, there's a wonderful admissions team at the GSB, and reinforcing what you're saying, when I get the chance to host panels with Kirsten, I remember she said that in the first year she was going to read all of the essays. And I was like, Kirsten, are you nuts? There's going to be 8,000 of them. Are you really going to read 8,000 essays about what matters most to you and why? And she addressed it 12 months later, being the sort of person that she was. And this idea with a tagline of change lives, change organizations, change the world, how she felt that many people were really trying to answer in terms of what they thought Stanford wanted to hear, perhaps, rather than that sort of true self and really focusing on what it is that you want to share. So it's an invitation for introspection, right?
Of course. It really is. I think an applicant should be looking to provide the depth and the self-awareness and, the view of what might not be necessarily captured in, say, a resume or an LOR. The GSB really does want to know who these applicants are as people and how they might contribute to the richness and the diversity of the class through their viewpoints, their backgrounds, their experiences, things like that. So it really is a unique opportunity and an open invitation to share that part of yourself and to introspect and to shine a light beyond the professional accomplishments.
Now, you mentioned the word vulnerability, which plunges us into the very personal, because perhaps the instinct for applicants is to try to wow Stanford with their accomplishments. How do you make that distinction between what you've accomplished and who you really are?
Right, that's a great question. I think of what matters most as more of an origin story, right? And I think about framing that essay in terms of a past-present look, in terms of what exactly has shaped you into who you are and led to perhaps the recent impacts that you've made today, or led to the things that drive you. There's certainly room in the application, in other parts and other components, to move beyond that past present and to cover the most recent impacts in your path and your goals going forward. So I think it's again, I would resist the urge to maybe shine a light on those resume recap highlights or any of those things in that what matters most, and instead just focus on substantiating what matters most to you based on the experiences you've had in your background and the things that have been inspired your direction in life.
Maybe that's a good point to remind everyone that there are lots of pieces to the puzzle. There is a resume. We'll be talking about this for HBS as they lead you through resumes, recommendations before they get to the essay. But just you're the reminder of there are many things perhaps they'll already know about you and how you can then bring in new, fresh material, personal material for the essay. So being very mindful about how you're using each part of the application.
Exactly. And it's all graded it's all evaluated rather holistically, right? So it isn't just one component that is a make or break, but rather the complete picture. Everything is reviewed holistically: the resumes, the letters of reference, the application form, the essays, of course, anything supplemental. So it is absolutely not imperative or critical or even desirable to try to cram all of those highlights and impacts into the essay themselves. The essay, I think it's really important, as I've said, to not over strategize that, to just truly answer the question and to answer it in a true and authentic way. Showcase those dimensions, those personal qualities, those characteristics that we might not otherwise know or see in those other parts of the application.
We'll be talking with Carla about the fact that in Boston, HBS does not explicitly ask, why Harvard Business School, but Stanford does. Perhaps people breathlessly rush in to talk about touchy-feely courses and all of the electives they're going to do in year 2. How do you advise applicants to use this second essay about why Stanford?
Yeah, this is it's a great essay question as well. I think with this one, I would advise them to think about the impact that they'd like to have rather than fixating on titles that they might aim to hold or any particular status or anything like that. So convey the career vision, both the short term as well as the long term, with clarity and with specificity is my key tip. Applicants, they won't necessarily be judged on the specific career goal, but they should demonstrate that they've spent some time thinking about what they'd like to do with their lives and the impact they'd like to have. So what you write with respect to the aspiration of the career goal, the admissions committee recognizes this isn't set in stone. It might change after you matriculate, particularly after being exposed to the distinguished faculty, a very talented and diverse set of peers in the cohort. Really just your essay should demonstrate that you've spent some time thinking about this, about your true north, and then the impact that you'd like to have. There isn't one perfect career goal that's going to make or break the application or serve as the final piece of the narrative. Oftentimes, applicants tend to wonder, well, does this fit better with my story? Does this fit better with my narrative? I might be interested in this particular goal, but I think this one would just make me sound better. And truly, there isn't just one answer. It's really just the applicant should think about why it is they'd like to go to business school and how it's going to help them along in their career. Think about this, what they have in terms of experience and credentials at this point, where they'd like to go, and how this experience is going to help them bridge that gap. So I would say the main tip I have is do your research, right? Because you'll also need to convey, not just why you need an MBA to achieve these goals, but how Stanford's program in particular would help you achieve them. So key tip, allow yourself time to do the research on the schools and their offerings, and also reflect upon, again, that self-reflection, reflect upon what motivates you, your impact to date, and the path you aspire to take. So really just understand and demonstrate why this is the right time for you to pursue the MBA and why Stanford's the place for you to do that. Ask yourself how the resources at the GSB are going to facilitate you going on to that next stage of your professional career and your journey. So it wouldn't be enough to just name some of the pertinent courses like touchy-feely or the clubs. You'll need to really share what you aim to learn from these offerings. Provide a view also into the distinctive perspective that you would bring to the class and how the program would prepare you to create the impact you aspire to make. I think also for folks applying to multiple schools, one thing to keep in mind is that different schools have different cultures and offerings and opportunities. So it's generally not a sound strategy to just copy and paste and just change a couple course names. It's best to just really give it some thought and to tailor it to the GSB.
Now, with all of the events I've been fortunate to host with you, with senior admission staff from the GSB, the word I hear more than any other, and you just used it 6 or 7 times, is the word impact. Schools in New York might say, how do you want to get from point A to point B in 50 characters? What is the job title in the industry that you intend to be in? But Stanford, it really is this focus on impact. What is the difference between saying I want to be the product manager in this tech unicorn versus the broader notion of impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. There's nothing wrong with aspiring toward a certain title or a certain industry or company. I would think when I think about impact, I think about really understanding the space. I think about really understanding the trends in that space and the opportunities, the players in it, and what exactly you would want your role to be beyond the title, looking beyond the title. what areas interest you within that space? What, if we look at the longer time horizon of, say, the next, well, even, near term to long term, say 5 years, 20 years, where do you see it going? What do you want to do? What would you like to facilitate, or what problems would you like to solve? What hurdles would you like to help climb? Specificity. When I think of impact, I think of having that specificity in terms of those goals.
Right. Well, that gets us started. Now we are going to cross the country to the East Coast. Carla, I was reminded last night talking to Jonathan, a recent HBS graduate, just a lovely, lovely individual. And the school attracts, super smart people, high achievers. And there must be this temptation to say, well, I'm going to share all of this, all of the accomplishments, everything that I've done. But in the last year or two, Harvard Business School has introduced a word limit. You and I have seen applications that would go on for pages and pages. Take us through the essay and also perhaps the chronology of everything that the team might have already looked at by the time they get to the question that says, what more should we know about you?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's an excellent question. And I think the essence of the essay question is pointing directly at what you just stated, which is by the time they get there, they know a lot about you. You will have covered your basic bio data, but also employment. And both Harvard and Stanford, I think, delve into quite deeply different aspects of that. So there's a short answer section where you detail what your specific role is, what your challenges and accomplishments have been, reasons for leaving. You'll also have covered activities, extracurricular interests, and awards. And you'll have also detailed in 500 characters what your post-MBA goals are. And typically, we suggest you focus on short and long term, but similar to what Silpa mentioned, there's no one right answer. It should just make sense with kind of where you've been. A nice blend of realism and ambition, I think, is kind of the only generalization I can attach to that. But by the time you get to the essay, they also have seen your resume. So they know a lot about you already. And I think that they really do stress, and they do for a good reason, it's what more do you want to share with the committee? And I think of this question as, the sort of white space on the resume, the things that wouldn't belong on the resume, that help explain different moves, different thinking, but you don't want it to be resume to prose. And so I think sort of a high level way of tackling this can be, which is tough within the 900 character or the 900 word limit now, which is, where have you been, where are you now, and where are you headed, with most of that focusing on kind of very similar to what Silpa was talking about, like the formative, transformative moments in your life that have helped put you on this trajectory, and helping them really understand who the human is. And, you don't want to just give more depth or have this be, the highlight reel of accomplishments in essay form. That's really what your resume is. You want it to be your opportunity to explain what is driving you, and also highlight some of the things that you'll be able to contribute to the program. But they do not ask why HBS. I remember when I first got there, it was like, look, we know why. We know why people want to come here. Who doesn't want to be here, and that's not interesting to them. They really want to understand you. So when I think about, and Silpa touched on this too, it's like painting a portrait of who you are. It's the motivations. It's the, giving them a sense of not just like what you want to be aspirationally, because anyone can speculate. I think that's one of the big mistakes is, charting this course of, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And that's helpful only if you have credibility there. And I think you want to root it in who you are as a person, and kind of how you got to be the way that you are, and the different challenges perhaps that you faced. I think it can be really interesting to see, what have you been through? And how have you handled the different things that life has thrown your way, as it informs what you want to do next. It's not the kitchen sink and lots of random stories that are personal, but more a specific targeted, and especially with the 900 words now, you really don't have an opportunity to go too far off into any sort of tangent. So make sure that the things that you're discussing are not things that they would necessarily know about you and would want to know, as it informs what's coming, so that you can really stand out and communicate fit. which is a tall order, but hopefully that's helpful as kind of a baseline. But, again, it shouldn't be something restating what they already know about you. Nobody really wants to read about the latest deal that you did unless it's an epic, legendary deal. And even then, not too much time spent on that. Make it an interesting story that you would want to read, that helps inform the human. Who's the human here? Versus you don't want to be a brochure of a person like a lot of folks are with this essay. So I think that's probably my fundamental tip is, bring the human to the table so that they can connect with someone and help make sense of all of the other things that are in the application that they've reviewed.
Right. Now, you have helped so many individuals securing a place at HBS, at Stanford, Wharton, the top schools. And I want to just pick up on a nugget that you shared within the context as we began this webinar of perhaps application volumes that are going to jump in the 2023-24 admission cycle. MBB, Big Four, investment bankers who could talk about more M&A deals. They could talk about decks of PowerPoint slides, but you emphasize the idea of formative and transformative. So the essays, with everything else that they have, it's what, a path that you've taken, choices that you've made?
Exactly. I think so much of what the MBA experience at HBS is about, the case method is founded on this idea that they want to help you make better decisions in the face of ambiguity. And you want to show them that you have that capability. And I think making sense of, different challenges that you've been through, what has been formative and developmental for you as an individual as it informs what you want to do with your, life and with your career. The mission of HBS is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. So it should be clear that you are on a pathway to making some sort of difference. What do you care about in terms of the things that motivate you? And how does that connect to the general management degree at HBS? I recall a lot of conversations around like, wow, you would think that, while we're great at leadership, this isn't a leadership school. So you don't want to just have an essay about, leadership per se. You want to focus on, yes, leadership is great to exhibit, but it's almost better to have your recommenders focus on selling you and your attributes than having, you don't want this to be a humble brag where you're pretending not to brag about your successes. I think it's so much better and so much more impactful when you can talk about the major formative milestones that shaped who you were, who you are today, and then touch a little bit on who you want to become, which you can cover to a large degree in your goals. But with this angle of like what Silpa was saying, what are your values? What are your ambitions? And also make it clear that you're someone who is able to contribute. I think the fundamental thing that we would often look for is like, it should be clear that whatever you engage is better for your presence. And so however that takes form, I think it can come in many different shapes and sizes. And there's also not one right way to tackle this essay. There's many pathways into these programs. And I think the sort of guiding force should be tell the truth. You don't need to, and it's oftentimes a waste of time to try to exaggerate or amplify, because that'll back you into a corner when you get into the interview, but really focus on what is something that is unique. You have your own story. What has brought you to the gates of HBS, and what is the distance traveled between where you started in life and where you've arrived at this moment where you're putting in an application to apply to Harvard Business School and to what is a general management program. It should connect. You don't want to just tell a really interesting personal story and then have it be, what does this have to do with anything? They want to be able to know. I mean, it's not a goals essay, but it should drive forward in terms of it makes sense that you would want to pursue this at this stage in your life, and that it would both be helpful for you as well as others in the community, that they would benefit from your experiences and your presence, and that there's evidence that you're someone who can grow. And that, again, that doesn't mean being flawless. In fact, as Silpa touched on as well, like sometimes it's, overcoming failure, overcoming, different challenges, I think is a great way to really connect. Not that it has to be that, again, many, many different ways to, as my mom would say, slice this apple. But I think that there's many ideas that, may be unique to you that fit with your, background and your experiences that would be illuminating in terms of helping to understand what's driving you. And it does require reflection. It does require to do justice to this question. be expansive and be vulnerable, I think can be really helpful. But it's not about, again, trying to package or impress. I think that can really backfire if it's like, you're trying to explain to them how great you are. Let your accomplishments speak for themselves and try to show them in the stories that you tell versus tell them. Help them understand through different experiences that you've been through what it is that has been formative. And so it's helpful to, speak with someone who can look back at your life and also, even take some stock on, like, what are the key things that made me who I am today? And how does that relate to who I want to become? And how does Harvard and the case method fit into that, that overall kind of catalytic process that would happen? What would happen to me in going to HBS, and why should anyone care? Is it just clear that you're going to go to HBS and then make a lot of money, or are you going to do something important with that in terms of your life and your career? So impact is also something that they seek as well. So there's overlap there with some of the other top programs. They want people that have strong character, integrity, and values, and that are able to demonstrate that. So again, many different avenues to kind of go at this without unlimited space. You're going to have to make some choices about what you share and how, but it should be expansive based on what you've already given them.
And then you've alluded to three voices, of course, the applicant and that genuine authenticity, but two other voices of the recommenders, and perhaps being very mindful of what they might be sharing in terms of character and values and accomplishments, so that perhaps they're then giving you the freedom to share that more personal story in your essay.
Absolutely. I talk about that a lot. In fact, that it's really tempting to want to explain and show off in a way, and in many cases, there's incredible things that people have accomplished. But if it's possible for your recommender to tell that story, that's always my preference. You'll come across as, you'll come across as they're looking for humility too, right? So it's hard to do that when it's like, well, and I did this, and then I did this, and then I'm responsible for this, and my hard work ethic and all these things where you're describing and qualifying yourself can be really dangerous. Let your recommenders do that work of talking about how focused you are, how exceptional you are, how committed you are, and how talented and intelligent you are. And let your story focus on, what was behind all of these, things, and how did you get to be the way that you are? And so I think having two recommenders gives you that opportunity to alleviate a lot of the pressure to tell that story. And that brings me to another point, is that it's interesting that sometimes people feel tempted to start the essay before they've tackled other pieces of the application. And I do think that it's really difficult to do a great job at this essay if you start the essay first, because really it is, what more do you want us to know about you? So what have you told them, and what do you have your recommenders focusing on? You're not necessarily, you shouldn't be drafting your letters of recommendation, but what are you going to prompt them to focus on? And so this is your opportunity in preparing a brief for them to help them craft something impactful for you, to have them focus on a lot of the professional accomplishments and the impacts of those, and for you to really focus on, again, the human behind all of it, the things that are driving your decision, what brings you meaning. There were a number of my clients last year that got really interesting questions in their interviews that are, at the end of your career and at the end of your life, what do you hope to have accomplished? Let's say you're at your retirement party, what do you want your life to look like at that stage? And I think those questions can actually be very interesting in terms of informing what you would share. How do you define success? And what will a life that is, of meaning and purpose and impact look like? And how does the MBA, which I find it fascinating that business school seems to be one of the leading places to tackle some of the most pressing challenges that are facing the world. I think a lot of us have been pretty disappointed, or there are limitations with other sectors. And a lot of folks that are, whether it's, you're working on solving some issues with poverty or refugees, or, and it doesn't have to be that, but you might be using private equity as an opportunity to, create value and social value with access to financial tools and capital that can make the world and even address interestingly enough, some of the, wealth gaps in this country. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to think about, what is it that I'm up to and what do I want my life to look like? And how am I going to be someone who is going to communicate my value by being able to focus on what have I engaged and how is that translating to success, not only before coming to the MBA, but during the MBA and beyond. So it's a tall order, but I think it really requires, as other folks have talked about, looking at the full picture that's being painted here of who is coming to the table and what's missing and what would they never know about you were you not to share it with them, because it shouldn't be in any other part of your application. Hopefully that's helpful.
So now, retirement parties, are those still
I know, is that a
thing?
thing?
My viewers, I have the personal privilege to work with Carla, to work with Silpa, to work with Judith and the rest of the Fortuna team. Why am I ever going to retire? But we've recorded so many of these different sessions on so many themes, essays, recommenders, resumes, and I encourage all of you to look through our different channels, both the Fortuna website, YouTube, and Carla, just to wrap up, we'll keep it very brief, but in one session specific to HBS, you talked about the 6 C's. I mentioned community just a moment ago. If you can run through those, because I was like sort of trying to catch shooting stars the last time you mentioned them, and then everybody can go and find the full version of the video as you fill in the details. But what are the 6 C's at HBS?
Well, I think it comes, first and foremost, you want to think about the curriculum. What is the curriculum? What does it mean? And there's great videos on the case method, which is another, not officially a C necessarily, but that's the curriculum. Then you want to think about the community and your fit for the community. And, perhaps your essay can even touch on that and the different community engagement pieces. And actually, it reminds me very, very briefly that the key things that when people think about HBS, I want them to think not HB&S, but CAL, and that is community engagement, appetite and aptitude, and leadership. And not to say that you should write an essay about one of those things, but you should make sure that your application covers all of those elements. So, that's critical to kind of highlight and understand that that's how you're going to be evaluated holistically. And so how is the essay an opportunity to delve into those things? But curriculum, community, there's the culture. It's a very culture heavy place. And you can talk to different students. It's very, very easy to find individuals who are at these different programs now. And I recommend cold emailing if you don't know or have friends at these different institutions to talk about the culture and how that impacts the development of an MBA student and whether that's a good fit for you. Stanford is a lot smaller than HBS. So I think that has an impact on the culture and the climate and your experience. And then you also have, the larger, what did I do? Community, culture, curriculum. There's also your commitment to making things better, because of the things that you do. And so evidence of that. And then there's also the collaborativeness. It's a place where 65% of the community lives on campus. And so you're going to be part of this community more holistically. And then your career, what is the career trajectory that you're focused on? And how will the general management degree further that? And understanding what that means. They've pioneered the general management degree. The case method is really there to help you learn to make better decisions in the face of ambiguity. So be able to demonstrate that. Did I get all of the C's, or is there one more?
I think you did, and they're great themes. We talk a lot with our clients about enjoying applying to business school and to think about those 6 C's and more broadly. Of course, Judith, when you were leading the admissions team at Wharton, every year you'd think about essays, what you wanted to find out about candidates. And Wharton has really embedded the sense of community in their application. They now talk about how you will contribute to that community. So talk to us about Wharton and what it is that a candidate is trying to share with Blair and her team.
Sure. I used to really like the opportunity to work on the essay questions. And actually one of the members of our team, Scott, was involved in writing the current one, which I think is kind of fun. I've been thinking a lot about this question and what it really means. And I think that part of the Wharton interest in discovering how you're going to bring your true self to the community is really based on the fact that its reputation, for better or for worse, is a little bit more like, I'm going to become a finance person. I'm very cutthroat. I'm very competitive. I'm going to, it really was started as the first business school in the country in the 1880s because it was definitely training these legions of young men at the time. You can tell I'm a historian in my free time, to become really, contributors to society. So what has happened over these past number of years is this real interest in community, and that is both the community at school, the larger university, West Philadelphia, which surrounds the institution, and then of course in the wider world. And I think the question is based to understand, what do you know about the institution and how do you see yourself there, right? We were all talking about how it's super easy to go online and sort of pick things that make sense for you. And I think Silpa mentioned earlier, you don't want to do a cut and paste job. I feel that is so strong a message for Wharton as well, that Wharton really prides itself in being a class that is quite large, as you all know. It's close to Harvard size, but that it has divided itself into cohorts and clusters. And so you're kind of coming from a class of about 850 into these smaller subsections. And then from there, you're really, kind of getting down to a much smaller group, including your learning team, which are a group of individuals that go through that first year together. Undeniably, this sense of engagement is so important. And Wharton is not looking for you to say, I'm going to become a leader of this existing organization, or, these are the things that I intend to throw myself into wholeheartedly. Wharton may also be looking for you to participate actively in another way. What does community mean to you? Does it mean that you're going to be working with underclass students? Does it mean that you're going to be tutoring other people on your learning team about, various financial or marketing principles? Does it mean that you're going to find people that have like-minded interests? They may not all be academic, right? Mental health has become at the forefront of so many of the schools that we're talking about today. And I really want to make that clear, that it's not always about, this is an existing organization and I'm going to join it, but where are the ways that you see yourself being able to really impact with your background and your interests and your history? So not surprisingly, Wharton is full of entrepreneurs that also see their opportunity to start things within the student culture that can ultimately, to use a word that's being used a lot, impact, how the community grows together. So inevitably, I like this question a lot because I think it really balances, as you all know, Wharton does ask two questions, and I think it's a very nice balance to the other question that's being asked as well.
So you sort of see it as connecting the dots between the personal and the professional, and how you're bringing those two together in the application?
Very much so. And much like Carla mentioned earlier, Wharton is not looking for a repeat of things that they can find in other parts of your application. So it's hard, right? Because if you think about it in terms of real estate, and I frequently do, it's the real estate of your essays and your resume and your letters of recommendation and your online application and hopefully your interview and all those bits and pieces that come to show who you are as an individual. And again, that's just scratching the surface. We would never assume that you can be summed up in this document that you're sending to these schools. But Wharton is again in the context of your writing, hoping to understand, what are the goals that you've set for yourself, and then how did you get to want these goals? So it's really, what are the factors that are obviously contributed to becoming who you are as an individual, and then how does that on that journey, because the first job that you might have might not be the third job that you're going to have post-grad, and everybody understands that. So how does that come together? And really telling a story, if you will. I talk about it as being a journey, but bringing the reader along with you. And I cannot emphasize this enough. As you know, I was at Wharton for close to a decade. The first thing I did would read those essays. The last thing I would do would look at GMAT and GRE scores, because that was a lot less interesting to me. But I really wanted to understand who that person was, where they were coming from, how they got to be who they are. And then what was it that they were going to bring to this community? So perhaps it also goes back, Penn was founded by Quakers. And I think that's a lot about how they see themselves in the world, is this place where people are coming together and incredible things happen. So that's why the Wharton questions are designed the way that they are.
Of course, I know that the historian in you, Judith, is reveling in, 140 years ago, it was all men. Last year, it was 51.6% women, which is a tremendous trajectory. All of them are facing the question of why Wharton and why the MBA. And perhaps we're back to this theme that both Carla and Silpa have touched on, this gift, this opportunity for self-reflection. What is the admissions committee hoping to understand? Is it again about career or a wider sense of impact, purpose, the themes that we've been discussing on this session together?
There's so many similarities between our three schools, and it is not about the next job at all. It's not about, I'm going to become a marketing manager at Google. You might do that along the way, but you really are also becoming a visionary for recognizing the role of technology, talking about AI, what's going to happen next, what are some of the impacts of opportunities that lie ahead for you. So to me, it's a lot about building a case, if you will, for how you got to be who you are, and then what are you going to do with it? And then if you think about it, I do talk about it like an equation, who I am now plus an MBA, and that helps me to become who I'm going to become next, or who I evolve into. I don't think that Wharton or any MBA is like poof, the magic formula, and you emerge fully formed, but it is very much an evolution. And I think coming to Wharton and coming to any school, having a plan, so to speak, career management would regularly sit in on the conversation. We weren't ever trying to figure out, like, what are the odds of you getting that job that you say that you want? But more so, what is your thought process that has led you to think about this career path? So viability for your career after grad is going to be really important. We talk a lot with our current clients about, so you really have this interest in public service. You talk a lot about, working for XYZ institution. How does that happen given the fact that you've been at an investment bank? What are the pieces, if you will, that are going to help you get to that next part? And what's fueling that interest? So a lot of it, Matt, to go back, is really connecting the dots. And I'm kind of laughing because for those of you that care, Philadelphia is actually on a grid system, which makes it pretty easy to navigate. But it's a lot, as Matt, who lives in Paris, will say, like, not everything is a straight line, and we know. But to be able to get from A to B to C, and I sometimes struggle, I'll be honest with you all. I don't love these questions compared to the ones at Stanford and Harvard that are very, like, you really get to think about your life in a much broader way. But I do understand what Wharton is trying to get from these conversations. And I really, even for those of you that are not applying to Wharton or not applying to Harvard or Stanford, I urge you to look at these questions together, because they can really help build a foundation for what it is you want to talk about. It's a funny thing to recommend, but I always tell students, like, look at what other schools are thinking about, because that's going to maybe get some ideas flowing for you as well.
Right. The French came up with the expression cul-de-sac, which for the grid system is a road that leads nowhere. Possible, they have many other great words in their language. Maybe what I suggest that we do, we've got just a few more minutes, and moving on from the essays, each of the different themes that we now cover, I'd like to look at through the lens of essays, and turn to each of you quickly for your thoughts. So as we think about a strategy for round one versus round two, someone's like saying, oh, it's going to be Labor Day just before those round one deadlines. That'll give me an extra day off work. I'll be able to bang out these essays. Carla, is that realistic to imagine that thoughtful, impactful essays for any three of these schools could be done over a weekend?
Highly, highly unlikely. Is it possible? maybe. I wouldn't advise that strategy.
Can we please beg you not to do this?
Please don't do that. For your own sanity, and also you're selling yourself short if you wait. And that really kind of summarizes what I think about strategy with round one versus round two. Apply when you're ready. There's a lot of folks out there that imagine, oh, if I get in, it's like you get extra points for applying round one versus round two. Not if you're not ready. It's not about being early. Sometimes, you need more time to figure out even what your next move is going to be. You need to have more conversations. You need to think more deeply about what it is that you want to do, or you need a better test score to be in a space where you are not going to be a conversation around, is this person going to struggle with the rigor of the curriculum based on what we're seeing? So there's no, other than potentially knowing sooner, but a lot of folks at HBS in particular, there's this deferred to round two for further consideration situation. And I think they think that they'll find out sooner, maybe not. You might have to wait longer. So a lot of very qualified people are pushed to round two. And that's another thing that you'll want to talk to a consultant about in terms of like, there may just be, and so you could have had not just a weekend to prepare everything, but months to prepare. So don't rush it. You're not doing yourself any favors. Maybe you'll get lucky, but luck is not a strategy. I think it's not a good one anyway. So I think that would be my recommendation, is really make sure that you put your absolute best foot forward in every piece of the application. Harvard only has 2 rounds. Other schools have a third, but one or the other. They're very good at predicting volume. And so there's typically the same number of slots, like proportionally allotted for round one versus round two. So you can't really game the round, which is why I say, and we would say it in admissions too, but people had a hard time believing it. Apply when you're ready, but I mean it does not help you to get in round one. You're not hurting yourself, by waiting until round two, especially if you are rushing over the summer. So think about, kind of when you're going to be able to, if you're going to apply for the next class, like which round is going to give you that opportunity. Some people are absolutely ready and have been ready and are almost ready to submit their applications today. So they can't wait for round one, and have everything really teed up, and we're ready to do that. But, it's not necessary that you're at that stage either. I think the sooner you can get honest with yourself in terms of what you're about. There have been people who've put it together in a week and have been able to make that successful, and then there's people who have spent months. So there's no one size fits all there, but apply when you're ready.
So unless you're James Joyce, and to be honest, nobody really understands the Dubliners, let alone much of his work. Silpa, in your role in GSB admissions, you read a lot of applications, you read a lot of essays. Could you tell when someone had really taken the time, for the thoughtful vulnerability, authenticity that you were describing earlier in this session?
I think it's quite clear, yes, when someone's able to bring that depth and that insight into these pieces, into the essays, who's given it the time, and what perhaps was a more rushed effort that maybe just barely scratches the surface of the question or offers a view or an insight into who they are. So I absolutely agree with Carla. I think that if we look at round one versus round two, the more important question to answer here is, when can you put forth the most thoughtful and compelling application? If you have the time to do that, then absolutely, yes, you can go for round one. But really, it's since there's no disadvantage between the two, and what's ultimately important is giving it the thought and introspecting and taking the time to reflect and to do your research and to put forth a thoughtful and a compelling application. It among the most prudent things you can do is just take your time. So take your time and really submit when you're ready. So the admissions committee, and having read thousands and thousands of applications, is fairly, I'd say fairly adept at being able to see that quite quickly when someone's taken a thoughtful and a deliberate approach versus maybe just at the 11th hour tried to throw something together and submit it in the thought or in the hopes that by applying earlier in round one, they're at an advantage. It's not so. It's more important to put forth a thoughtful and a more deliberate application.
And bringing in the delightful Stanish, his question, how do you know that the application is ready? I mean, Judith, there's also perhaps all the material is there, and then you make the mistake of handing it off to a committee. And now 14 people are all weighing in and, well, I think that you should have emphasized this and have more of this. So sort of talk us through those closing stages when perhaps you as an individual are happy with this material. How much input might you then look for?
Sure. First of all, shout out to Stanish. Really glad you're with us. You've become a friend of Fortuna, so we're glad to see you. Look, I think the more you ask people their advice, the more advice you're going to get. So my general rule of thumb is get one authentic reader that you trust, that knows you, that is willing to push back when they think that things are not going to be as strongly worded or strongly presented. But if you start asking, alums and people you work with and your boss, it's like, it's way too much noise. When you're cooking, if you guys like to cook and you're in the kitchen and everybody's telling you a different spice to put in, it's really not going to be a great flavor profile ultimately. So you want to just, if you're cooking Italian that night, go with the oregano and basil. I wouldn't start putting in fish sauce. And that's, you can tell it's lunchtime where I am. But I want to really suggest that you think about who is it that knows you, who knows that you're, full of it, or that you're telling the truth, or that you're pumping yourself up, or you're being vulnerable, but limit that number. And how do you know? There comes a time when you can tell with yourself that it is good and ready. And I can tell this, it's really interesting. I say to my coaches that I work with all the time, I can tell when a client is really comfortable, that it came easily, that it wasn't a struggle, that it just flowed. You as a writer will know that as well. I'm not saying you're not going to tinker with it, of course, but there's sometimes you just feel in your gut that this is really who you are. And the other thing I would say, again, hearkening back to what my colleagues have said, don't push it if it's not there. Really, the worst thing you can do is try to make it happen. And it feels like aggravated, and it feels not comfortable. And that's something that a reader can pick up on. Certainly when I was in committee at Wharton, we could tell that really easily.
So admissions, art or science? And I'm going to turn to our resident artist. Carla, you're far too modest to mention that you are an artist whose work is exhibited around the country. The mayor of Boston wants to come to your shows. I encourage everybody to check out Carla's artwork, but you're also an admissions artist. And you've seen everything, including the common pitfalls, the mistakes. If you were just perhaps to select one or two of those common pitfalls, what would you choose?
Oh, there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but we don't need to spend too much time on that, other than to say, I think, again, the focusing too much on what you think they want to hear versus, and trying to shapeshift into this idea or look like somebody else who is admitted to the program or follow a certain trajectory that you think is going to be appetizing. I think that is problematic, and I think that failing to do the deep reflection that is required, and imagining that you have to be overly intentional about everything and every step of the process, I think is a big mistake. A lot of times people try to make it seem like they always knew what was going to happen, and this was always their plan, and that's not really how life works. So you can, just talk about the different choices that you made. Some may have gone, wonderfully, and some may not have, but hopefully you've learned from all of them and can present yourself as real, with a bit of vulnerability, instead of this overly polished, I always knew exactly what was going to happen and everything always went my way. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes, is that's what I call the brochure of a human. I'm like, I can't connect with this thing because it doesn't seem real. So be real. And there's obviously boundaries around how much to share, when to share. And that's why you need, you should involve somebody who knows you well in the process to kind of check with, in terms of, if you're on the right path. But it's both art and science. You gotta focus on the kind of core elements that are true, and then you want to help tie together and make sense of it. It's sort of the Steve Jobs, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can connect them looking back. And I think there's a there's a lot of value in that statement as you think about this process, is that looking back, actually knowing what I know now, I'm on a different trajectory, and knowing what you don't want to do is also a big part of it too. But not to get too complex there, but hopefully that's helpful.
Well, the three of you are among the kindest, most supportive, most generous people that I know, and I see that in the coaching work and the level of support and encouragement that you provide. But you're also very candid and very honest. So Silpa, I'm going to turn to you for JP. JP has written in with this idea of looking at a first draft from a client where that first, I mean, it's a first draft after all, so it wasn't ideal, but perhaps it wasn't authentic. How do you then help a candidate to shape something and the true north that we were discussing earlier?
Okay, so that's a good question. I would say that if there's something that wasn't ideal, oftentimes what's lacking, I would say, is depth, right? So oftentimes people will want to tell their story, but not really show the experiences that have led to the takeaways or the values that they've gained. Not really answering the hows and the whys that really inform the story and provide the very helpful color behind it. So in terms of how we help them, how we might help them bring out that depth and that insight and that color to the story. I think oftentimes by asking questions around their experiences, by asking about experiences or anecdotes that have led them to certain realizations, encouraging them to think about what these things have evoked, or the feelings, or the takeaways that they've gotten from things. I think that oftentimes adds deeper layers that make for a more engaging story. And what's important to know for JP and the others is that oftentimes this is a very iterative process. It is when we get a first draft, very seldom is somebody able to provide an essay or material that is ready on the first draft. It takes several rounds of thoughtful iteration and dialogue around some of these questions and around some of these aspects of their story. And it's it can be challenging without having that additional collaboration and that insight into some of which of these things to dive into, or some of these specific elements of your story that you would need to provide more context around. But the short answer to that is just how, to the question of how do you work with something that perhaps isn't ideal or isn't authentic or deep enough and generate something that is just, probing deeper into the questions and the experiences and showing rather than telling in order to engage the admissions committee or whoever your reader might be that you're sharing this essay with.
Right. So this notion of dialogue in a process to illustrate formative and transformative. Judith, my last question then for you. 8 weeks to the round one deadlines for those of us that are watching this live today. What can you achieve in 8 weeks? Carla talked about, hey, before you rush into the essays, think about all of those other parts for HBS to then say, well, what more? What is your advice for how our viewers can best use the 2 months that lie ahead?
I think it's really helpful to take a good look at the application holistically. So you very much want to situate yourself, right? You want to get online, you want to register for an application, you want to print out a copy, you want to start taking notes on, what you think might work. I generally like to start with things that are going to be out of my control as quickly as possible. So the resume is a great thing to nail and get out and feel that it's set. The letters of recommendation are really good things to start to put together packets that you're going to, have a conversation with your recommender this week or next week and say, oh, by the way, I'm applying. Would you feel comfortable writing for me? Here's an outline of the things that I've been involved with. These are the schools that I'm looking at. This is what they're looking for. So then you can really turn your attention back to brainstorming how it is that you want to approach the essays and the online application and the short answers that are going to be asked at both Stanford and Harvard. So I know it sounds very old school, but print this thing out. It's sometimes better to pace around your living room and mutter to yourself and really go through this piece by piece by piece, because there's so much opportunity there for you to put together this whole presentation that is not just predicated on those essays. I also think from your perspective, it's good to know that you're accomplishing things, right? So if you get your resume out the door, you get your letters of rec kind of good to go, you're then starting to chip away at the other things, and you give yourself a minute to not feel like your foot on the gas for the next 8 weeks. Sometimes good ideas don't happen when they're supposed to, right? You're sitting down, it's 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and you might not be ready to actually write anything. But it could happen when you're out for a jog, or you're walking your dog, or you're making dinner, you're listening to your partner talk about something, right? So I really want to encourage you to give yourself the space to let those ideas marinate a little bit. And inevitably, you will come a time when you start to outline. We generally go with and Carla talked about the kitchen sink, put it all in there for the time being. Then you can always pull things out afterwards, but scribble, get some ideas going. And then eventually you'll start to tease out those threads that are going to be relevant. Please do not leave yourself until the last minute to submit everything. I generally set a personal deadline a week before. You never know what's going to happen. I will tell you a funny story. Hillary Clinton had once written, so going back a couple of years, a letter of recommendation for an applicant to Wharton, but evidently there was a storm where she was, and so she couldn't get it to us. And I mean, that's just like a pretty, extreme example, but don't wait until the last 2 days. And I really, so set yourself a couple of days ahead that you're in a good place and that you're not scrambling, because things happen, transcripts don't upload and your resume looks weird and you can't get it. You're at 907 words for Harvard and you really need to be at 900. But I really want to encourage you to look at this it's funny, but like it's both productive and also a lot of mental, thinking and contemplation. So there are things that you can work on steadily, get them out. And there are things that you're going to need a little more time with. 8 weeks, you definitely do it. I feel like it's possible to do it without stressing out. If you talk to me in 4 weeks, I'd be a little more worried about you. But right now, I feel like, if you're steady, you can certainly hit those dates coming up in September.
And my admiration to Hillary, despite the storm, not taking the temptation to send in that letter of recommendation from somebody else's Gmail account. We wouldn't want
it was.
Happen, would we?
I like that joke. No, she was very much on her own.
One of you applied 2+2, made the interview stage to both HBS and Wharton, and said, "Hey, can we have a consultation to talk and see what next steps for applying?" Absolutely, please reach out, any of you, to gain advice about your personal situation and your story. Non-traditional applicants, maybe someone with a design background, that's deepest case. Fantastic. What an incredible contribution, the voice that you will bring. We've talked a lot about artists, and I would want everybody to check out Carla's art shows. This is a very creative process, putting together applications. And this was the first of 4 sessions. Next Thursday at noon Eastern, we'll be bringing together more members of the Fortuna team, senior admissions roles from Chicago Booth, Columbia, MIT Sloan, and Kellogg. That rounds out the M7. From there, we'll move into the S7 with Haas, Duke, Stern, Yale. And then the final session, we'll look at some of the top international schools with INSEAD and London Business School. But thank you, everybody, for joining this session. And if you caught this on YouTube, please share with others that themselves might be thinking about business school. As always, Carla, Judith, Silper, it's such a privilege to have these events together. Now I've got my soundbite about being formative and transformative. I'm going to take that away. But thank you for such a great session.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. It was great to see everybody. Take care. Thanks again.
Good luck.